Hi guys, welcome back to Father and Son Investing. Today's video is going to answer the question, are I-bonds a good way to pay for college tuition? I-bonds are getting a lot of press right now, especially because of the 9.62% interest rate that they're paying. That's an annualized interest rate. 9.62% is unheard of for I-bonds. Today we'll quickly cover what I-bonds are. We'll talk about what the advantages of using I-bonds are for college tuition. We'll talk about what I see as the disadvantages are for using I-bonds for college tuition. In the end, I'll give you my opinion. Is using I-bonds for tuition a good idea? Now let's just talk about what I-bonds are. I-bonds are a savings tool issued by the United States Treasury that have two components, an inflation rate component and a fixed component. The idea is designed to help people save and keep up with inflation. When we combine those two components, we come up with the composite component, which currently is 9.62% on an annualized basis. In fact, currently, the 9.62% is really all just the indexed to inflation portion. The fixed rate has been set at 0 for some time. Now, I view I-bonds as just a way of maintaining your purchasing power. With the fixed rate set at 0%, all one is doing is keeping up with inflation. So while that 9.62% interest rate sounds fantastic, really it's just maintaining your current purchasing power. If you had $1,000 of purchasing power now and inflation eats away at that, eventually you would have less than $1,000 of purchasing power. With this bond, you still maintain that same purchasing power such that you would have $1,000 referenced back to today's value of $1. Now, how can I-bonds be used to pay for college education? Well, there is an education tax exclusion in these I-bonds and also in EE bonds that allows one to not pay taxes on the interest if they are used for higher education. Now, one needs to be very aware of a number of limitations that are involved with being able to take this tax exclusion. There are 5 conditions that you need to meet. You need to meet all of them and able to take this tax exclusion. The first one is that the I-bond needs to be cashed out or redeemed within the same tax year in which you are claiming an exclusion. The second one is that you paid for qualified higher education expenses in the same tax year for yourself, your spouse, or a dependent. Now, while that sounds easy, it can be very easy also to not meet those 2 criteria. Say, for instance, you cash out your bond in December and you pay for tuition in January. You can see how you've already missed that tax exclusion. The third criteria is that your filing status can't be married filing separately. The fourth exclusion is that your modified adjusted gross income needs to meet the criteria on IRS Form 8815. When we go to this form and look at line 9, it will tell us what the current modified adjusted gross income limits are. If you are anything other than married filing jointly, you're looking at $98,200. And if you are married filing jointly, you're looking at $154,800. If your adjusted gross income is greater than those limits, you're not going to be able to take the tax exclusion. And the fifth criteria is, and this is a big one, you were 24 years old or older before the savings bonds were issued. So if you're buying this for a child and giving it to the child in their name on their social security number, they're not going to be able to take that tax exclusion. The way to get around that is to buy it for yourself and then use it to pay for a dependent's tuition. In a related matter to this, they have a note here that says, a bond bought by a parent and issued in the name of his or her child under age 24 does not qualify for the exclusion for the parent or the child. So after having run through those 5 criteria to take the tax exclusion, in what way are I-bonds then beneficial for paying for higher education? That is, that you would save on the tax on that interest depending on what your tax bracket is. What is the other advantage that I see for purchasing I-bonds and using them for education? That is the indexed to the inflation rate. If you're just saving money for college in cash, you would realize that interest rates on savings accounts are extremely poor. I have a, quote, high interest rate savings account that's currently paying me about 0.7% interest, obviously not keeping up with inflation. So the I-bond here is at least trying to maintain that purchasing power that I discussed earlier. Now, that's going to lead me to the disadvantages of using I-bonds for paying for higher education. While in theory, the I-bond interest rate is maintaining your purchasing power, it doesn't necessarily apply when it comes to paying for college tuition. Let me show you a graph of what I'm talking about. This data comes from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics and goes back to 1980, showing the inflation rate, or the US CPI, versus college tuition inflation rate. And we'll see that college tuition really is outpacing the CPI by almost 5-to-1. So while your purchasing power for those entities in the US CPI would be theoretically maintained buying an I-bond, it is definitely not maintained buying an I-bond if you're thinking about paying for college tuition. In fact, if we look at this graph, which appeared on Fox Business Channel, we will see how the actual private college cost and the actual public college cost are compared to what the costs would be if they maintained a steady rate with the inflation rate. For 2021-22, the actual private college cost was more than $50,000. But if we were to compare that to what it would look like if it stayed with the inflation rate, we would be sitting right around $20,000. For the public college cost, you're looking at about $22,500, which, if it were staying with the inflation rate, would be less than $10,000. So the disadvantage that I see with trying to use Series I savings bonds to pay for college tuition is that you're not actually going to be maintaining your purchasing power based on history of rising inflation rate for college tuition versus the CPI inflation rate. So what is my opinion? Is it a good idea to use Series I savings bonds to pay for college tuition? Well, certainly it's better than just holding on to your cash and saving it up for tuition, but realize that it's just not going to be keeping pace with the inflation rate of tuition. And therefore, I think that there may be better vehicles to use to save for college tuition. That's going to lead us to a couple of videos about College 529 plans, and we'll also talk about prepaid tuition. Please feel free to leave some comments about your thoughts about using Series I bonds to pay for college tuition. If this video was helpful for you, please give us a thumbs up, and we'd love to have you as a subscriber. As always, enjoy your investing.